everybody, welcome to the Fire It Up with CJ show. Today we're going to be talking to Swami Khecaranatha, otherwise known as Nati G, about his book, The Divine Thread, the Stillness Sutras. Now, we had talked to Nati G earlier in the year about stillness, and today is a continuation of that because part of what you talk about the book is Kundalini Awakening, which I think there's a lot of fanfare around and probably not a lot of clear understanding of what it means, what's involved, what it means from a spiritual standpoint. So that's what we're going to cover today. So welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be back.
Yeah, so I'm excited. So how do you define Kundalini? Because I think and what do you think are some of the misconceptions about what it is and what you believe it is based on your own experiences?
Okay. Well, Kundalini is that creative power of Shiva, of consciousness, to create us as individuals, right? So I think the most succinct way that you can define Kundalini is that we are the individuated expression of that divine self,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And that happens through God, through Shiva's overflowing of his own joy to express himself and to create all manifestation, but specifically to create us as individuated expressions of himself. That term is called Kundalini Shakti. Shakti, of course, means energy or power, right?
Mm.
So, in essence, we are Kundalini. We are that vital force of that supreme consciousness expressing itself and walking around with two legs.
Okay, so it's really Shiva's Shiva coming down with the energy of Kundalini Shakti, which
Right.
is what we are. We're Kundalini Shakti, walking
Yeah.
around with the energy of this supreme consciousness within inside of us.
Yeah. So, in everything that we are, all our physical body, our mental and emotional bodies, everything grows from that power of Kundalini. I actually described this, I think, in my first book called Depth Over Time. There's not, sometime in the last 10 or 20 years ago, basically scientists discovered that when we are conceived, the first thing that shows up is a streak of light.
Hmm.
Now that is Kundalini Shakti, right?
I mean, they've actually shown scientifically that there's light that comes when
There
there's
is, it's
conception.
like a thread. Oh, wait. Oh, a divine thread. There's this thread of light, and that's the first perceptible recognition that there is a living force growing within the mother, right? And then they contract that, and they can see that then from that, then what really happens is our psychic body forms, which they can't quite perceive, right? But from that, our body grows. So it grows from that streak of light, right?
Hmm.
You can say then that streak of light is our essence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because it grows and articulates itself as the psychic body, as the chakras and the Sushumna, the central channel, right? It is how that same force keeps filling us up, right? As that descending force. And it's also the pathway, the ascending force, the ascending pathway for us to reach back to and connect to our source.
So the ascending force is what I think people traditionally refer to Kundalini Awakening. And so how would you describe what is happening? So there's this descending force of consciousness coming to us, and then this ascending force and you called it the other day, or in our previous interview, as a vertical energy. Um,
Right.
what, how, what's happening with this
Okay,
part?
so that ascending and descending force is always present in us. We normal people aren't aware actually of either, right? We're
Right.
not really aware that there's this force that is created us and that is perpetually sustaining its connection, ourself. And so we don't know that, so we don't really think about, well, there's got to be a way for me to follow that back up.
Right.
So that's the Kundalini Awakening is not exactly just, it's not that descending force. It is Shiva, it is God, through his grace, infusing into us the wish to be free, right? And okay, he would download that, if you want to think of it that way, through that channel, because that is the communication device. That's the divining rod between us and our Creator, right? And so Kundalini Awaken happens because of what's called Shaktipat. Shaktipata is the Sanskrit term. Shaktipata means descent of grace, right? So since we were created out of that same power, right, then there's that grace is awakening us to that power, right? And at the same time instilling in us the wish to discover and to develop our capacity to be aware and of that power, right? So the Kundalini Awakening happens because of grace. It is not grace, the actual moment of grace happening, right?
But are we always graced? We're always graced by God.
We're always graced. We don't know it, right?
Okay, so when you say the grace of God, I think that what popped into my head was just this image. If you see these images of God's finger coming and lightning coming down, and that's the grace of God.
Yes, you can think of it like that. And within the very articulated tradition of tantric Shaivism, then there's actually multiple levels, different levels of intensity of that grace, right? The highest is God points his finger at us and we are just completely free. We are revealed. What's revealed to us is our highest self, and we are established in that, right? For the rest of us schmucks, right? Something else happens, right? So
and I've met people like that. Like Byron Katie talks about feeling so desperate and hopeless, and she sleeps on the ground because she feels like she can't even sleep in her bed, and then she's just crying and just hopefully despondent. And then she wakes up the next morning like just enlightened. Like all of a sudden she understands the true, like in an enlightened form. Same thing with Eckhart Tolle seems to actually, he's like, I had a nervous breakdown, was what he described of it. And so there are people who are touched by grace and they wake up in an altered form.
Yeah, and then there's, if you will, there's no sadhana, there's no practice to be done in that sense, and the practice, if you will, the effort is to express that realization in our lives and to the people around us. So anyhow, that intensity, that's if you will, the highest level of that Shaktipat, right? There's actually 3 significant levels, and there's 9 within each one. These ancient people had too much time on their hand. They didn't have Facebook to deal with.
Okay, so what were the other 2?
Well, the other 2, the most important one is, the second is that grace happens, but we're not fully established there, right? And yet all we really have to do is just do our sadhana to establish ourselves there. The most predominant is the level of grace where that same awakening takes place, that same descent takes place, and simultaneous with that, it triggers to us the intent, the need, the understanding to find an energy source, i.e. a teacher, to give us the energy to establish ourselves in that moment of grace. Actually, I'll read something from the book because I just happened to open that up.
Yes, of course you did.
Yes. Right. So this third level of grace uh, is talking about the level of intensity. Uh, is the level of intensity of having received a transmission of grace that causes us to feel a longing. I'm going to read it actually directly. A
Sure.
transmission of grace that causes him to feel a longing that causes him to seek out a true master that can empower him to attain both happiness and liberation.
Mm.
And what's important there is that it's not, we're not seeking somebody who can give us happiness and liberation, but who can empower us to attain it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that is called Shakti transmission, right?
Mm-hmm.
So simultaneous in this third level is we have this profound longing, and then all of a sudden we say, I need a teacher. My own experience of this 46 years ago was exactly that. I heard about my teacher from somebody who saw him 500 miles away. The next day, I grew up an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
The next day, all I could do was think about God. That's
Wow.
all I could think about. I became a vegetarian overnight. I started doing hatha yoga 4 hours a day, right? And then at the same time, I said, I got to find somebody, I got to find a teacher. And I went through this circuitous route. It took me about 9 months,
Wow.
you know, and I'm walking down the street I lived in Texas at that time, and I ended up in Indiana. I'm walking down the street, and I look over, and there's a poster of this teacher, Rudy, and I say, that's who my friend was telling me about. He never knew his name. He never knew anything, right? That night,
Huh.
that night I went to Rudy's class, and as they say, the rest is history. So that longing was created in me by that grace, right? And the clarity that I need an energy support in order to discover that, to establish myself in that place of happiness and liberation, needed a teacher. And that's why we need teachers. It's why non-dual tantric practices talk so much about the need for a teacher for most people.
Okay, so you so what's interesting, I want to go back to your own personal experience. So you said before you're an atheist, living kind of a hard and fast life from according to
Yeah,
the book. Not I'm not trying to put any words, but that's what
yeah,
you said about yourself. Okay.
that's a nice way to describe it. Right.
And then you woke up saying, I need to discover God. Like, can you recall? You said it was 46 plus years ago. So you just woke up thinking, I'm yearning to discover God.
It is all I could think about was God. You
And so
know,
talking to your friend, what did your friend say? He or she
he
just, what did he
he
say?
he had gone from West Texas, where he and I lived, to East Texas to procure some product.
Hmm. Okay.
And instead of procuring the product, he came back and he told me that a friend of his there had invited him to this meditation thing. And he's describing his experience, right? And this gigantic ball of energy, this big fat bald guy, right? He didn't know his name. And for him, it was like, well, that's why I didn't do what I went to do. And for him, it was nothing. Nothing ever happened for him.
Oh,
But
interesting. So he came, encountered his energy, even was in the presence of Rudy, but it was almost like he was supposed to tell you. That was his
yeah,
primary
he was,
thing.
if you will, carrying that seed, right?
Wow.
That was just the way that energy happened in me, right? Opened in me, right? And then as I said, I started doing hatha yoga. I became a vegetarian. I grew up eating meat and potatoes and corn once a month, right? And so it was really started my spiritual quest, right? And I went this and that, but everything from that period to during the 9 months was just I went from this place to that place to this place, didn't work out, and finally I ended up in Indiana, and that's where I met Rudy,
And
right?
how did you even know? Because I find it interesting that at the time, probably there weren't a lot of yoga studios. There are probably not a lot of vegetarians like there are today. So, how did you know to pursue yoga as a path? Or had you experienced it and thought, okay, I'm going to do 4 hours of hatha yoga every day?
No, I mean, I was in Odessa, Texas. They probably still don't know what yoga is there, right? It was just kind of spontaneous. There was some sense of needing to purify, some sense of needing to find some different vibration in myself, right?
Hmm.
And so I'll read you another part of quotes from this that
Yeah.
leads to this, right? Uh, and again, it's talking about grace, and this is uh, from a very ancient text by a man named Abhinavagupta, who was the greatest tantric master. He lived in the 10th century. And he says Shiva's power liberates the individual whose innate godlike nature is concealed by his own embodiment,
Hmm.
liberating him from bondage by bestowing his grace first through Shaktipada, which causes him to which causes him to seek a guru for initiation, and second through the means provided by that guru. The guru is merely the locus or the vehicle of God's grace, while the means are his instruments. The means are God's instruments.
Okay, got it. So it's almost like you're trying to go, like you go to a coffee shop to get, this is very rude, but
A
crude
triple
understanding.
latte
No,
decaf.
no, no. You go to get internet access because you can't get, but you have to go to it's the means. You go to the
Yeah,
coffee shop to get the means, and you go to the Starbucks and they have
right,
um, internet access. That's the only
right.
way. Like if you're in foreign countries, sometimes that's the only way that you can get internet access. So this person is kind of a guru, is the conveyor of this energy.
Yes, that Shakti transmission that I mentioned, that the way you would describe that as a liberating current, right?
Okay.
So this really what happens when Shaktipat happens, liberation is there. It's just that we need more energy to lift us, if you will,
Mm.
into that place of revelation, into that place. So the only God gives grace, and only God frees, right? But because we're a little dense, right? We've piled a lot of tension and karma on ourselves. We need some sadhana, some energy to propel us through the transformation of
Ah,
self.
okay. All right. So the connection with the guru is kind of like the lighter fluid. Like you already have it in you, but someone needs to light the fire inside you, even though it's there. Like stoke the flames or whatever.
Exactly right, and to periodically refill up the fuel container, right?
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So the
Got it.
light, the way you would describe it, the light is always there. It just doesn't really have the energy or the means to turn itself on.
Right. Right.
So
Okay.
God turns the switch on, and then the guru is kind of like make sure it stays plugged
With the
in. So that,
yeah, blowing air into fanning the.
exactly right. Yes.
Okay. So I've often wondered. So it seems like it's I often find the concealing our greatness kind of curious and confusing to me. Why
Mhm.
would we be designed in this way that this incredible life force, energy, Kundalini, Shiva, or whatever is in us? Why would we be designed to actually have it hidden? Why?
Uh, well, that's the kind of the topic of a long discussion, right?
Okay.
And uh, uh, there's these ancient tantric masters came to really understand that God has five powers, right? Creation, maintenance, dissolution, right?
Okay.
Concealment, and revelation, right? In the process of creation, this infinite, unbounded awareness becomes finite, becomes bound, if you will, right?
Hmm.
And there, in that process, there is an intentional forgetting by God to forget his own nature so that through us, his own joy, his own expansion takes place through us as individuals. How amazing
Hmm.
that God said, I want to be bigger, right? And he created us so that we could be the instrument of that growth and the experiencer of that growth.
Hmm.
So we're all created. We maintain for a while, sometimes not so good, right?
Right.
Right. The body, we maintain it best we can, etc. And then at some point we die. That
Mm-hmm.
happens. That is the cycle of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
For anything that's alive, it's going to die, right? The concealment is what happens as manifest life takes place. The revelation is what happens when we recognize I'm not this body that's living and dying, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so revelation, grace is that revelation, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is it is the turning on the light, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and the you know how the whole teacher guru thing, if you connect to that, is guru means dispeller of darkness.
Mm.
It does not mean the bringer of light, right?
Mm.
So the
Mm-hmm.
guru isn't ever putting anything into you, creating something that's not in you. He's only dispelling the darkness by providing with us the energy, the guidance, the direction for us to dismantle our own uh, misunderstanding, right? And that's the only role a teacher has for us in our sadhana, but
Mm.
of course a very powerful and important one, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of
Mm-hmm.
course, this is all in the context of tantric, non-dual tantric traditions that, again, as we talked in our previous discussion, that understand that energy is the source, is the pathway to consciousness. So
Mm-hmm.
then the energy of a teacher, this liberating current that flows through the teacher, is providing us the energy to fuel our own path through that pathway back to consciousness. Right.
And so there's some people who that energy is concealed. They live and die and it's never ever
Exactly.
manifested, right? And then some people like yourself, all of a sudden you ran into your friend in Texas and
Right.
then you're like
Right.
turned your whole life around until you saw Rudy. And when you saw Rudy, what was the felt experience of it? Because here, what was it? Because you
Uh,
talk about the.
how do you describe an atomic explosion? I
So,
mean,
yeah,
the
so.
the the, I, the real way to describe it is my heart exploded. The
Hmm.
heart that I didn't know I had opened, and you know, it would just exploded into this pure joy and love and recognition that life was not what I thought it was.
Mm. So all of a sudden there was kind of an unveiling of the delusion or misunderstanding the minute you
That
met him.
the minute I met him, the first time I looked into his eyes, right? Because our particular practice is an eyes open transmission of that
Wow.
shakti, right?
Okay.
And kaboom! It just happened, right? And so you said it right. It is the dispelling of darkness, right? It is the lifting us in back into the light, to use that terminology, so that we can see, right? When normally we can't see because we live in our own self-created darkness, right? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we perpetuate that because of our ego, right?
So the Kundalini awakening could happen through, like the kind of the third way, which is like you have no sadhana, no practice. Boom, you have like this flame on, And then the second is a conveyance through a guru who kind of dispels the light. And then the third was, what was the
So
third way?
actually, you've got it a little bit reversed. The
Sorry.
third is the first is God just sprinkles his fairy dust on you and boom, it's there, right?
Okay. Okay.
The second, the kind of slightly less intensity is it takes us a while to figure out what this dust is that's falling on us, right? But
Okay.
but but once it kind of percolates or penetrates through us, we don't need a teacher, right?
Okay.
We don't need sadhana, we don't need a practice, right? 99% of the people fall into the third category, which is this this wish opens in us something out of nowhere, just like my own experience, out of nowhere, right? I was totally depressed, totally you know, not looking for light. I'll tell you that, right?
Right.
When that happened, and then this happened, and then so simultaneous with that, with this wish to know God, if you will, was this recognition that I needed a teacher, that I needed the energy to
Hmm.
that I needed the energy to know God, right?
I don't know
That's
where. I'm not even sure what to put my own. I've had these. I've told you during the last episode. I've had these. I don't even know how to explain them. They're paranormal experiences. I don't know what they. I don't know what. I mean, and I've had many of them throughout my life. One time I would go to sleep, and then I would just boom in the void, and I was like, where am I? And it was
right,
all dark, and I looked for my hands, and they didn't exist. And
right,
then I looked for anything, it didn't exist. I tried to say something, it didn't exist. I was just
right,
I just didn't exist. And it totally freaked me out. And I like, now I would love to be in that place. But at the time, I didn't know it happened. It
right,
happened. I've had time when I was in a coaching workshop because I'm a coach and I had said whatever my statement. And like all of a sudden, my body started trembling and I just burst out crying. Like I've had all these. One time I was gardening and then I put my hand in the soil and I just, boom, I don't even know where I went.
right.
I've had these things in meditation. I'm not sure what, I don't know what category I am. I don't know if in those three categories or if I don't know where I am in those three categories.
Well, and it's not also it's something that we need to, it's not exactly something we want to use as a measuring stick for ourselves, but having heard you describe your experiences, what it probably suggests is that quote you fall in the third category because what you need to do is to discover whatever sadhana in you that permanently brings you back into that experience, right? And that's what sadhana is all about,
To
right?
try to
Our,
constantly be in the permanent sense of that.
yeah. So
I don't.
we look at it's like medical doctors practice medicine. Well, who wants to go to have somebody do open heart medicine that's practicing medicine, right?
Right.
We really want somebody who's not practicing, but who's experienced. But the point, it's the same thing for us. Even though this opening has happened in us, you have these experiences periodically. Put your hand in the soil, and it's just the universe, right?
Right.
Right. What you want to do is to develop within yourself the capacity to connect to that experience and establish in yourself in that experience, and that's why we practice, right?
So some type of practice doesn't matter what kind of practice. I mean, because I
What
don't have a teacher. I have lots of teachers that I enjoy. You as a teacher, I enjoy Adi Ashanti. Like there's all these.
Right.
So
The teacher is just a small part of it. What's
mm,
important is the internal practice that you have an internal practice, right? That is perpetually turning your own life force back onto itself to discover its source, right?
mm-hmm.
And when particularly when there's a Kundalini awakening like that, you need to discover that you need to discover the Sushumna, right? You need to discover that as the central channel of that is your life force.
Mm-hmm.
My book, The Divine Thread, is the discussion about discovering not just that Sushumna and that flow of energy and that life force, but that channel, the subtle, most innermost core of the Sushumna, which is not the channel of energy, but the channel of consciousness, right?
The divine threat that you're
The
referring to.
divine thread, yes, what's
Right.
traditionally called the Brahmanadi, right?
Right.
And so, you know, and because otherwise, then this kind of this awareness that's kind of bubbles up every once in a while, and you don't have access to it, right?
Mm.
And God is a pretty good guy, so he every once in a while gives us this experience that says, "Remember me,"
Right.
right? And
Right.
so, but then, as we talked in our last discussion, then because we have the capacity to make conscious choice, right? We have to choose to internalize our awareness, to internalize our life force, and perpetually reestablish what one of my students says, to habituate ourselves in that place of awareness. And we
Mm.
do that by developing the psychic body and understanding the liberating currents that already exist within us as the pathway back into higher consciousness.
So that's through. So you're saying, because I've interviewed hundreds of people, but there's certain practices that focus on the chakra and the microcosmic orbit and all these different types of things that are
Right.
chakra related and about kind of consciously bringing the energy down, around, and up. Is that
Yes.
what you mean about a sadhana, a practice?
Yes, it's a sadhana that practice that focuses on the psychic body, and
Okay.
each different tradition, each different school has different ways of relating to the different flow, the orbit, the different orbit, etc. Right, and
Right.
all of them should lead to that central thread.
Okay, got it. So it's about practicing, and it's about kind of a snapping back to center. And as you, in your parlance, it's like this vertical channel, constantly reminding and reinforcing that there's this vertical channel within
Well,
us.
yes, in fact, that we are permanently established in that vertical connection, right? And
Right.
and in the openness of consciousness that goes along with that, and we are living from and engaging our life from that place. It's not something that we just find, every once in a while or in our meditation. We find it in our meditation and we open our eyes and it's still there.
Mm.
And we see the world as an expression of that same consciousness, and we
Mm.
have the experience of that non-separation.
Mm. Because there are
Right.
times there right now what's happening to me because I haven't necessarily cultivated because frankly kind of it was so the last time it happened it was almost like I was stoned for about
Yeah.
3 months and I couldn't taste anything, I couldn't feel anything, but at the
Right.
same time I've never been so present in my entire life as
Right.
that 3 month period, but it was so sort of inconvenient. It sounds so awful to say. I don't mean to be an ingrate, but it was.
Right.
I just felt like it was really hard for me to interrelate with the rest of the world.
And look,
So
that's understandable because it's like a shock wave, right?
yeah,
Right. And so it takes time to integrate that new energy or that new awareness into yourself, right?
right,
And that's where the daily practice is really important, right?
yeah. So just the daily practice is to help the integration process. Because when I was doing daily was repeating the one meditation that got me in that state. And then it was just there's so much energy running through me that I felt like I was burning myself out. Like, it's almost like you had said sticking your finger in an electrical outlet and you're like,
Right.
it's like, okay, you need to take your finger out of the electrical outlet now and then. So, yes.
Well, and that's a typical response, and mostly what we have to do is to get bigger in our capacity to to open and allow that energy to move through us without it discombobulating us. And it does take a little bit of time, and it takes the diligence of practice, right? Yes.
Okay, to kind of
Yeah.
so the sadhana is actually integrating that energy so that you
It-
can expand at some level to
exactly.
hold it. Because for me, I almost like my body was not capable of holding that much energy, so it just like fried my whole central nervous system.
Yeah, look, it's
Like
a little, I often describe it, as like an old tractor that's been sitting out in the rain, and it's just all rusted and frozen up and everything, right?
yes,
That's what most of our psychic bodies are like. And so it
yeah,
takes a little bit of nudging, it takes a little oil here, and you don't just fire it up and rev it up to 100 miles an hour. You have to go a little slow, but it
right.
is just the creating that dynamic of that flow in ourself that creates that capacity to hold that energy.
Okay, got so my husband is going through something very similar because I think this stuff is contagious. Like when you start hanging around other people who are
Sure, of
having
course.
this stuff, if your energy is vibrating at a higher level, I
Right.
think it affects everyone because
How could it not?
you're
Yes.
saying your wife, right? I mean, you both are in a practice. I'm sure both of you are having different stages of awakening and opening. So for him, he said he's experiencing it as a kind of a bubbling feeling, like literally, like when you're saying bubbling up. He said he
Yeah.
literally feels it as like sometimes his heart beats really fast, and it's like a
Hmm.
gurgling in his and kind of right around the area between the heart and his third chakra. Is
Uh-huh.
that? And he said, "Well, ask him. Is that normal?" I'm like, "Okay, I'll ask. I don't know if he'll know, but what are
Yes,
the
I do
different?"
know, and it is normal, right?
Okay.
And that's that energy, just it's releasing, right? Right? And the challenge is if you don't have the practice to channel it back into the psychic, but back into the Sushumna, then it starts to it works its way into the physical body, it works its way into the mental and emotional bodies, right? And that's when people start to have all kinds of difficulties because his energy
Mm,
is infusing every dimension of us, right?
right.
And so instead of it really expanding, if you will, our awareness of our own spiritual self, right? It's starting to because it has nowhere to go. It has to go somewhere, right?
Right.
We're not consciously channeling it into the Sushumna. Then it starts to go. We feel it in our bodies. We feel it in our emotional constructs, in our mental and our thought construct. And because it's a powerful energy, then it can things can wiggle and jiggle,
Yeah, so it
right?
feels like a bubbling. He said
Yeah.
physically it feels like a bubbling, and his heart has actually been beating faster. And he
Yeah.
keeps on going to the doctor, and they're like, "You're fine." And he's like,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because it
"Okay."
had not. It's not. The source isn't a physical issue. It's an energetic issue, right?
But it's actually manifesting in his heart.
It. That's what. Yeah, it'll manifest in the physical system. It'll manifest in our thoughts. It'll manifest in our emotions. It'll manifest reinforcing our patterns, right?
Mm,
And so it's either going to open us up to a higher dimension of consciousness in it, or in fact reinforce a lower level of consciousness in it, because that's what
mm.
it's going to go somewhere and empower.
I see. So the energy has to go someplace. Like you were just saying, we all have energy. We can have it go horizontally, we can have it go vertically, but there's this excess energy, and it
Yes,
could
exactly.
go like a physical sensation, or it could go into an emotional feeling. It could have all these different expressions. I get.
Yeah,
Okay, finally
yeah.
get what you're saying.
Because what it's trying to do, CJ, it's trying to raise to ascend back to its own source, this energy, right? It's trying to liberate us. And so we have to surrender enough to let it liberate us. And that means also having the inner discipline to channel that energy to where it's trying to go.
Right. So it's almost like if you feel it trying to go through, it's how do you kind of cultivate it so that the energy can move up versus kind of, I don't know what to do. It's like how do you move it up the Shushuna, I think is what you're saying, up the
Well, yeah,
channel.
and so think of it. So if I want to drive from here to Sacramento,
Yeah.
right, there's a main highway that goes there. Let's say it's straight. And
Hmm.
then there's all these little side roads, right?
Right.
And if I just go on all the little side roads, then I'm just going to get lost forever, right? And
Right.
never get to where I want to go. So our sadhana is get on the straight road and don't get off.
Right. Like for me, it feels like what happened is that it was just like a lightning bolt, and
Yeah.
I like there was nothing to resist. I mean, there was shaking and stuff where I feel like it was probably shaking what you said were impurities. And I wanted to go into that. You called them psychic knots, impurities, or tension. So these are just like or the things that it's shaking around. Like, so for me, it was, I had stuff on my neck. So it was like shaking around my neck. So my arms are flying
Right.
around.
Right.
My body was, I was breathing. Just like a
Yeah.
crazy person. But as I was doing it, that's what happened to me. So what are all the physical manifestations of that?
Well,
What are the
the,
impurities?
what's happening is what's called a kriya, right?
Okay.
And that's where this energy force meets resistance, meets an obstacle, right?
Right.
Meets an impurity. So it's just the kind of shaking and baking that happens because that energy is trying to move somewhere, right? And it's meeting either a physical system, physical resistance or density, our mental and emotional density, right? And it's also meeting as we talked about those what are called granthi or knots within the psychic system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's really happening because this energy as it's awakened is trying to rise through the sushumna, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when it hits one of these particular knots, right, it's like it's hitting somewhere it can't go, right?
Right.
Can't go up the Sushumna, so it goes sideways, right? It goes into the
Oh.
body, it goes into the mental and emotional thing, right? Right? And so that's called a kriya, right? And so again, we have to come back to learning really how to really internalize all that energy inside the Sushumna that it's trying to rise within, right?
Right. So that it doesn't have to express itself this way, but
It,
can
over,
literally
yeah,
just
over
find.
time, that then it's not meeting the resistance, so then the kriyas aren't happening, right? Yeah.
Ah, okay, got it. So I assume that after one does this, they can still sit in stillness because there is no. And so I I guess I was hoping that what happens when this energy comes through is that it's like a laser blasting all these little stones into small bits. Is that also happening? Does it
Yes.
start?
So you think of it, it's trying to rise from our core, from the
Right.
base of the spine. It's trying to rise through, and as it rises up, right, it is like a laser or a
Or
water hose.
volcano or whatever,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's gonna spray out the stuff that is in the way, right?
Right.
And that's for most people that is the sadhana, and it's purifying the
Uh,
psychic body, and then over time, because then as enough of the boulders and pebbles are removed, then it has no more blockage, and that's the divine thread, because you'll see in the book it says
ah.
that energy rises unimpeded back to its source, right?
Hmm.
And that unimpeded rise is always happening. It's just we're so far removed from our capacity to feel it that for most people it's that's the central dimension of the Sushumna. The outer dimension is the Sushumna, and so that's where all the blasting is going on. The energy,
Ah.
okay, here comes another boulder, and it's got its laser thing, and it's whacking it, right? And that's normal.
Right.
But and my own experience was that for many, many, many years, right? At some point, enough purification has happened within the Sushumna that all of a sudden that that central thread becomes becomes evident to us, right?
Hmm.
And
Okay.
that's stillness. That central
Hmm.
thread is also stillness, right?
Hmm.
So to get there, to get to that moment of stillness, as the book talks about, we have to still our mind, we have to still our thoughts, we have to still our emotions, we have to even still our actions. And meaning by that is we don't act from self-serving intention. We surrender that, right? So all this we're becoming more still, we're becoming more still, right, in order to find stillness.
Hmm.
There,
Okay.
there's a graduation into that, right?
Right.
A maturation into that, and that's the maturation of our sadhana.
Interesting. So for what's weird for me is that, and I don't know if this has happened for you as well, but literally I'll be sleeping and I have those shaking, the kriyas. It's like stuff is happening when I'm not even consciously or awake. Or I'll talk to someone and they'll say something that's true and my head just like whap, like I
Yeah,
don't even know
because
what's happening.
that ascent, that which happened because of grace of Shaktipada, it is ascending. The issue is how quickly are you going to get out of the way? But so, right. And that's part of the surrender. But
Oh,
it's happening. It's always a conscious process, but the conscious process is us being a conscious that it's happening and really doing, if you will, the inner work to let it happen, right?
okay. So, I mean, for the inner work that I'm doing is just continuing to surrender, allow, surrender, control, surrender, control. And it just happens. And I don't like, I used to go like, what's happening? And now I just think, I don't know what's happening. Energy
I
is
think,
moving through me. I probably
yeah,
have, like you said, blockages. It's blasting through that.
yeah. So what you want to think about is to take that expression of surrender in terms of not having control, right? Meaning I'm not trying to control life and this and that and everything, and just when you close your eyes, find your heart and surrender there.
Oh, that's
So there's
okay.
an There's
That's a new
there's
thing.
kind of the internal surrendering, right? Which is really us becoming very, very still so that we can make contact with presence.
Hmm. Right, and then that
So,
was the next question I have. So you talk about opening your heart as being something that's so important. Why is that so important in this whole experience?
because there's only the heart of God there. And our own heart, the heart chakra, is the kind of the first, is the doorway into that heart, right? And so
Hmm.
that's when we open our heart, what do we feel when we really open our heart? Peace and joy and fulfillment, right? And that's our first contact with God.
Hmm.
That ever-present abundance and fullness. So that's why it's important to open the heart chakra and the space in the center of your head and the space above your head. What our Satguru,
Right, these two parts.
yeah. So the heart, the center of the head, not this point, the center of the head.
Right, it's as if I intersect
Yeah,
these two
exactly right.
points here, that's the
Yeah,
center, right?
and the space above the head, Nityananda called that the heart space,
Hmm.
right? And so, you know, we find our own heart, we recognize that that is also God's heart, and then through this internal work, we merge into that higher heart, right? And recognize that it's only God and it's only God's heart, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so that's the importance of that internal work, and it's important of opening our heart, really opening our heart.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that happens when we open our heart is that we get out of our mind.
Okay, so here's the as a contrast of that experience. Thinking to myself, I need to surrender. I need to surrender. Versus what I heard you just say is like my heart just opens to God and surrenders. A
Yeah, yeah,
very. It's not a thinking. I need to
yeah.
surrender, and
So
here's why I
instead
need to
of
surrender. It's just
exactly instead of thinking surrender, surrender.
yeah, just
That's
open your heart
that's
and surrender.
so there's both an internal and an external dynamic that's happening. So yeah, we might have,
Mm.
let's say we're a controlling person, right?
Yes, let's say hypothetically.
No indictments here, right? Right. And surrender control.
Yeah.
Every time you start to reach out and try to demand and control life, let it go.
Mm.
And then what that's gonna do is take all this energy that you've got extended out of yourself to try to control life, which you're never gonna win at, right?
Right.
Right? And you're internalizing that energy, right? Channeling it back
Mm.
into yourself and really surrendering inside.
Mm.
And then what happens is that surrender from the internal process starts to open. Then it starts to consciously, but kind of automatically express itself outside. Because
Mm.
that's where we live.
Mm.
We're trying to control life outside us. We do not live outside us. We live inside ourselves.
Mm. So going back to what you're saying, we have this horizontal expression or vertical expression. So instead of channeling it outward, trying to control everything,
Right.
just kind of bring that energy, because it's energy, bring it
Yeah,
back into my heart. And the only thing that I can really control is myself. And
exactly
right.
right.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
Interesting. So going back to the Kundalini then, so this is kind of this is the surrender. When you surrender, it's not from here thinking, it's surrendering here.
It starts with surrendering there, right? And it grows into being able to truly feel that liberating current flowing through the Sushumna, up the Sushumna, and then you surrender to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then what you'll
Ah, okay.
experience,
The felt experience of the energy flowing in
exactly,
there.
and
Ah.
you'll really recognize, I'm not this person that tries to control. I am this Shakti.
Mm.
And then that is the pathway. From that moment, we can begin to truly transcend our separated identity.
Mm. And that's the
Because,
practice to every day be in that. We do that practice so that we can always remember our
yeah.
oneness.
So part of the kind of growth in consciousness is, if you will, the continuum is that we believe we're a separated identity, right? I'm
Mm.
separate, right?
Mm-hmm.
As you progress in your sadhana, you'll come to understand I'm not separate, right? But that's kind of the middle stage, right? Then you mature, your own awareness matures to the resident. There's no discussion of separation. There is only Shiva's mantra is aham, I am. He doesn't have to say I'm. He doesn't even have to say I'm Shiva. He just says I am. So the progression is from absolute diversity or duality to the unity, to the unity in that diversity to unity. So we move from I'm just this separate person and this and this and this to I am part of this whole. I am an individuated expression of this divine whole, right? That is a significant milestone in our sadhana that, to be honest, not so many people get to, that they're fully established in there. But that's a milestone you have to reach in order to really discover that ultimate oneness.
Yeah, for me, it's a conceptual. I get it conceptually. I forget about it every day.
So then you want to have the experiential awareness of that, and that's the direct recognition that comes through our sadhana.
Yeah, love it. This has been so, thank you so
I'm
much.
so
Really,
pleased to have spent time with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. We've been talking to Natiji, the author of this book, The Divine Thread, the Stillness Sutras, of which all of what we've been talking about is in this book.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Yes. Okay. And your website is, tell us again,
Trikashala, TRIKASHALA.com.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
really,
My pleasure.
so much gratitude.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. I would love your support in any way by giving me comments below, or to subscribe to the show, or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.